Hello, my name is John Sharp, and my claim to fame in life is that I am friends with Dave Jewett. It's my pleasure to serve on Dave's YOD advisory team with a really great group of men. Dave and I talked about who should be the keynote speaker this year at our Southern Hills gathering. I asked Dave, it's a unique gathering of people every year. You know who's coming. What is the topic? What does everybody need to hear? He thought for a moment, and he said, in Dave Jewett fashion, he said, you know, John, one of the markers of a truly successful person is how do they navigate the difficulty of transitions in life. So we thought, we prayed, and we made a really short list. And at the top of that short list was our number one draft pick for speaking on this topic. Is my friend Steve Largent. I will tell you this about Steve. Steve inspires me to be a better man. He's a devoted follower of Jesus. He adores his wife, Terry. He is a marvelous dad and a blast of a grandfather, too. I have found him to be an exemplary leader of leaders in virtually every avenue that he's pursued in life, of people, in life, in work. Steve has taught me about being a good friend. I've seen him navigate the ups and downs of life in a way that I envy. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce to you our speaker today and my friend, Steve Largent.
Well, thank you, John. Is my mic working? Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, very good. You may be sorry by the end of the time I'm speaking that you can hear me still. But good morning. It's really, or good afternoon. It's really great to be here. Try to get that right. How are we doing? Okay. I actually have not spoken in Tulsa I've spoken one time the last 10 years. So this is really exciting for me to come back to Tulsa and see a lot of old friends and be able to have a chance to tell you a little bit about my life. And that's my purpose today. I'm going to begin, and, one of the things about when you haven't spoken very often to a group of people, move it where? Oh my God. Is that better? Better? Okay. All right. One of the great things about not having spoken in Tulsa for a long period of time is I can go back and reuse all my old jokes, and they still work. And one of them is the 5 B's of effective public speaking, which I learned a long time ago, and I'm going to share them with you again today. And if you don't know the 5 B's of effective public speaking, you might want to write them down. That way you can use them, and if I use them again, then you can call me on it. So, but it's be brief, brother, be brief. The 5 B's, and I'm going to try to be brief today. I have until 12:15, and I'm sure I'll be done before then. But I was asked by Dave to attempt to express my heart to you all today as it relates to my own career planning, my goals, my objectives, my aspirations. And so I'm going to try to do that with you. And those of you that know me, and I see several friends, many friends in this room today, you know it's really not difficult to ask me to share my life with people. In fact, my life has really been an open book for so many people since I was a sophomore in college at the University of Tulsa, when my name started getting thrown around in the sports pages, and then going on to play in the National Football League, and then into Congress, where everything you do is under scrutiny. But so it's not difficult for me to do to share my life with you, and that's what I'd like to do today. As a matter of fact, from what I understand about this conference or seminar today, I'm actually in your place as well. my life is in transition, and as Dave mentioned when he introduced me, I've had really 3 or 4 major transition points in my life. From when I graduated college, I got drafted by the NFL in the 4th round by the Houston Oilers. And I went down to Houston and was in training camp for about 6 weeks before Bum Phillips, the head coach for the Houston Oilers at that time, said, "Steve, we don't think you're going to make our team, and we're going to let you go early so you can make it with somebody else if you're going to make a team at all." And so he let me go, and I drove back to Oklahoma City, which was where my wife was waiting for me. And I got a call from Seattle, and they said, "We want to give you another chance." And so I took it. So I took everything that I felt like I needed for another tryout and packed it in one suitcase and went off to Seattle and ended up making the team and playing for 14 years. Probably 13 really good years, and then I played 14 years. And then I retired from the NFL. It wasn't my choice. It was my body was screaming at me, "You need to retire." So I took my 4.8 speed in the 40-yard dash, and I'd gotten it down to 5.0 in the 40-yard dash. So I knew it was time to leave. So that was a big transition for me, going from college life to the National Football League, and then going from the National Football League to I didn't know what. But I told people, reporters would ask me on a regular basis, "Steve, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" And I would say to them every time, I'd say, "Well, I think I've got a whole world of opportunity in front of me, and I'm looking forward to pursuing it." I said, "I only know 2 things that I'll never do. I'll never coach, and I'll never be in politics." So right then I learned a really valuable lesson. That's you should never say what you will never do. Because I think God was smiling at me when I said that. And He had a different path chosen for me. So in 1994, I was living in Tulsa. I'd moved back from Seattle. And I was happy pursuing a variety of things, speaking and doing public appearances and some commercials and stuff like that. And my wife said, "You know, Steve, I really think what you need to do is run for public office." And I said, "You're crazy." Now, I adore my wife. But I wasn't a big fan of her idea about me running for public office. But we spent some time praying about it, and I ended up running for office, as you know, in 1994. And, it wasn't like it was just an open seat and just calling out for me to run either. There were already 6 candidates in the Republican primary, and the primary was 2 months away. So this was in May when I decided to run for office. And I got into a 6-way primary with 2 months left before the election. Fortunately for me, I was able to get about 250 volunteers right out of the box. I invested some money of my own to run for office, and I did. And in Oklahoma, as you know, in order to avoid a runoff when you're in a crowded primary, you have to get over 50% of the vote. And so we were just trying to be one of the top 2 finishers in the league. I mean, in the race, and you can tell where my mind was. But I was just trying to be one of the top 2 finishers so I could get into a runoff. And so, sure enough, the election was held. I think it was like July 23rd or something. And I got in the race, and I got over 50% of the vote. So I avoided a runoff, went into the primary, got 63% of the vote, and now I'm in Congress. And the truth was, I'd been to Washington, D.C. twice in my life before I was elected to Congress. And the Redskins had beaten us once, and we had won 1 game. And that was the only time I'd been to Washington, D.C. So I ran for office, and as you know, I served 4 terms. And at the end of my 4th term, I actually left office to run for governor in the state of Oklahoma in 2002. And I ran, and it was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in my life, to meet so many Oklahomans all over the state and get into a race. And I thought I was going to win. All the polls showed that I was easily 6, 7, 8 points ahead the Friday before the Tuesday election. And then it all kind of came down. I ended up losing the election and was really disappointed. But I told my wife, I said, if I lose this election, and I didn't think I was going to, but if I do, that we're done with public office, right? And she said yes, she agreed with that. And so I lost that race, and I was finished with public office. I didn't have any aspirations to move on and do something else and try to, run a different race. But anyway, so I was really faced with my next transition. And so I opened an office here in Tulsa and was doing a lot of the same things I was doing before, speaking and representing a few people and doing that type of thing. And I was called by the Wireless Association. It's a major association in Washington, D.C., and they had a candidate who had committed to be the next CEO, and he had left. He had fallen through on his commitment just about 3 days before, and they called and wanted to interview me, and I interviewed with them. They hired me like 2 days later, and I've been there since then. That's what I do today. I'm the president and CEO of the Wireless Association. It's called CTIA, the Wireless Association in Washington, D.C. I have 95 people who work for me. And we have a budget of about $60 million, and I've been doing that now. I'm on my 11th year, and I've really enjoyed doing that. But now, what you don't know is I'm in transition again, because I've notified CTIA that my intention is to leave this year at some point in time. I'm under contract through December. They've got a search committee working now to replace me, and so I am in process of being replaced as we speak, and my wife and I just closed on a piece of property back in Tulsa. We just hired an architect, and we're going to build a house here in Tulsa, and we're really excited about that. We have 3 grandchildren here. We have 2 in Dallas, and 3 are in D.C., so we're leaving the 3 in D.C. and coming back here to Tulsa, and plan to die here, quite honestly. So, not for a long time, but I don't want you to get the wrong impression. But so anyway, Dave asked if I would mind coming back and talking a little bit about the transition that I'm in now and that I've faced over the years. And so I really started thinking about, I could have kind of given you my standard talk that I give to a lot of people all over the country, and it would have been funny, and you would have liked it, and you would have enjoyed it. But I really didn't think that's what Dave wanted to hear from me. He wanted to hear about some of the real hard issues that I faced in my life, and some of the principles that I try to live by. And so I started thinking about that. And so this speech I've never given it before, and I've got it written down, and it's exactly what I want to say. And but really, there's 4 really things that I look at in my life to measure how I'm doing and to get me through good times and bad. The first one, and I'll just start with that and end with a few words and then maybe take a few questions. But the first thing that I know for sure that I've learned in my life, I'm 59 years, I'll be 60 this year, is that God is in control. God is in control. And I have learned that in good times and bad. I've learned that God is in control, and He's in control of all things in my life. He's in charge. God's in control when I get inducted in the Hall of Fame, as I did in 1995, the Pro Football Hall of Fame. When my son Kramer was born with spina bifida, God was still in control. When I got elected to Congress in 1994, God was in control. When my parents are divorced and my stepfather is a chronic alcoholic, God was still in control. When I get a job for president, as president and CEO of the Wireless Trade Association, after losing a close race for governor, God's still in control. And I know that. And that's one thing I can count on. Now, I can't tell you that every day I'm thinking about the fact that God's in control. I often forget it. But this is one of the principles that I would say I've tried to build my life around, and that is that God is in control. The second principle that I've thought about is Jesus' desire for us is to live lives reconciled to God and to one another, to live with a clean slate. And that's not hard to do either. But what do I mean by that? It's having the courage to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, will you forgive me? The problem is that we've all grown up with a formula built into our heads, and that is this, that if I'm only 10% wrong and the other person is 90% wrong, it's incumbent upon them to apologize to me first, right? That's the formula we have. And yet, that's not what God says. What God says is, I want you to apologize first, even if you're only 10% wrong. That's what the Lord says. They can be 90% wrong and you only 10%, but I want you to be reconciled because God is into us living reconciled lives, reconciled to Him and reconciled to one another. It's hard. I know it's hard. But that's what God is saying to us and saying to me. He wants us to live reconciled lives. And I have a personal story that goes right to the heart of that. My dad divorced my mom when I was 6 years old. He left the state of Oklahoma. He didn't want to pay child support and didn't pay child support. He left and married a lady in Arkansas. Then he married another lady after he divorced her, and I don't know where she was from. Then finally married a lady that was from Pennsylvania, was living in Philadelphia when I was in the NFL, and would call me and ask for tickets to the game. And this is a dad that I didn't see but 2 times from the time I was 6 years old until I was playing in the National Football League. So I thought, if nothing else, he's got a lot of nerve, right? But the thing about it is that I was learning from a group of guys that I was meeting with about the importance of being reconciled, and that God wanted me to be reconciled to my dad, even if he was 90% wrong and I was only 10% wrong, if 10%. And so this was after I had played in the National Football League, was actually in Congress. And my dad divorced his wife in Philadelphia and moved back to the state of Oklahoma. And he actually moved 1.5 miles away from the house that I had at 61st and Yale. So he was living at 48th and Yale, and I was at 61st. So I was 1.5 miles away from him. And so I called him up one day and I said, Dad, let's go to breakfast. I heard you moved back here, and I said, I want to talk to you. And so I invited him to breakfast. We met halfway in between at the little pancake house that's there on Yale between 51st and 61st. And he came into the meeting and the breakfast, and I said, the reason I wanted to meet with you is I just want to tell you that I love you, that I forgive you, and that I wanted to apologize to you for the things I've done that's created the alienation that exists between us today. And I just want to ask you to forgive me for that. And he just broke down in his chair opposite the table from me, and he started crying. And he apologized to me, first time he'd ever done that. And we really, it began a process of healing our relationship. Now the problem, and the reason it didn't get totally done, was that I was called in my home. I was home on the weekend from Washington, D.C., and I got a call from my aunt, my dad's sister, from the hospital over at St. Francis, and said, Steve, you got to get up here right away. Your dad has had a heart attack and he's in the hospital. And so I ran, I didn't literally run, but I got to the hospital as fast as I could. It was, again, like I said, it was 5 minutes from my house. And went up there, and he had a heart attack, and the doctor came out in the hall and said, hey, your dad's not doing well, but we've got him in stable condition. And so I went in and I hugged my dad, and I grabbed his hand, I held it, and he had a mask on and all these tubes in him and stuff like that. And while I was holding his hand, he had another heart attack. And the doctors, of course, went in there and gave him medicine and pumped his heart and all that stuff and brought him out of it. And he was so mad, my dad was, so mad when they had revived him from that heart attack. And because he had told them explicitly, if I have another heart attack, I don't want you to revive me. I don't want to live. And it really was just a comment to me about the sad state that my dad was living in, that he would get that angry. But I went in and just grabbed his hand and told him I loved him and I was there for him. And it wasn't 5 minutes later that he had another heart attack, and the doctors listened to what he said, and they didn't revive him, and he died right there on the bed that evening. But the good thing is that I was able to reconcile my relationship with my dad. I wish I had more time with him, but I didn't. But I can't tell you, the thing is that when I reconciled with my dad, it wasn't my dad necessarily that was healed. It was me. It was my heart that was healed. And that's why I think this is so important, that we have this principle at work and alive in our lives, and staying reconciled with people that we love the most, with friends, with associates, with your family, with mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters, is to stay reconciled. So that's the second principle I've thought about that I think is really life-sustaining and has been very beneficial for me. The third one, and this is the greatest of command, of course, is to love God and to love others. It's the simplest, shortest, yet hardest, most daunting task of all, isn't it? To love God and to love others. I think it is. To love God and to love others as I love myself. But there is great freedom learning to love God, and great freedom when you learn to love others as you love yourself. And that's really all I can say about that. It's pretty simple. But it's very difficult to do. The last thing I wanted to share with you at this lunch was the idea of meeting together with friends and brothers or sisters. There's a verse that says, wherever two or more are gathered together, and another verse that talks about a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. One of the truly great things I've learned from my experience in Congress is the value of being in a small group of guys, actually. I met with several guys that were Republicans and Democrats in Congress to meet and talk about our personal lives, our families, to hold one another accountable and to confront them if necessary. That group continues to meet today, and I meet with them in Washington, D.C. But having a group of guys or gals, for the ladies that are here today, is one of the most important things I've ever committed my life to, committed myself to have a group of guys who are friends, who are willing to get into your life and you into theirs, and be honest with you. That's so important, and it's been important to me, and it's still important to me. We talked about the biggest decisions we faced. We talked about all the biggest issues we faced as a family, individually, and nothing was out of bounds. Everything was legal in this group. But we had a couple of rules. The first rule was that we had to love one another, and over time we really did come to love one another, and we still do. And the other is we were committed to keeping everything that we said in that room confidential, that it never got out of that room. And by that, it worked. It really worked. And you can imagine how difficult that is when you're meeting with members of Congress and talking about their deep personal issues and their lives. But having the confidentiality of your friends that were in the room with you was very, very important. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I had about principles that I've developed in my life that I try to live by. As I said, I don't always live by all these principles. I sometimes forget that God's in control. I sometimes don't stay reconciled with my wife or my kids. But these are principles that I think have really enabled me to follow the Lord in my life. So I think they're principles that they're obviously not my principles. They're God's principles. But with that, I'm going to close it and just ask for any questions that you guys might have of me. I was going to say, though, that I am excited about moving back to Tulsa. As I said, we're making plans now to be back here by the end of this year, and hopefully before that. And I look forward to being back here on a regular basis. So any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have your TU season tickets?
Do I don't have my TU season tickets yet. Yes, sir.
Have you met Russell Wilson?
I have not met Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, for those of you that don't know or didn't watch the Super Bowl. I've been in Seattle several times, but I've never been in a room with him, and I have not met him yet. I assume I will meet him very soon. He won every year the Seahawks give an award for the individual player on the team that exhibited the most dedicated life on the field and off the field, and they call it the Steve Largent Award. And Russell won that award his rookie year, not this last year, but the year before. And the Seahawks quit inviting me back to give the award away. I don't know why, but I went back this year, but he didn't win it this year. So I've not met him yet. I'm sure I will soon. Yes, ma'am. I still haven't got my tickets. You got to give me a little time.
Are you looking for a job as mayor?
Who's looking for a job as mayor?
Yeah, are you?
No. Definitely not. Yes, sir.
Are you ready to do some Oklahoma fishing?
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to doing a lot of things Oklahoma. But I don't know, you probably don't know this, but we have a ranch out east of town, and we have a big lake on it, and I'm really looking forward to spending a lot of time on that lake. Yes, sir. Do I regret the governorship? I don't regret running. I regret the result. I actually think that I still haven't sorted out what the Lord was saying to me through that whole process. I felt like we had a good campaign. I know we had great people on our campaign. I felt like the message was right for Oklahoma. But for whatever reason, we just got off the tracks the last weekend, and that cost us the race. And I don't know why, but you know, I've come to the point where I've accepted in my life a long time ago, and it doesn't. I don't know that I have any other thoughts than that to really give to you. Yes, sir.
Can you give us your testimony how you received Jesus Christ?
Sure.
as your Lord and Savior?
Yeah, I can give you my testimony in just a few minutes. As I said, I came from a home where my family, I have a broken home, and that was not as prevalent then as it is today. But my parents were divorced when I was 6. I had 2 younger brothers. I was going to school in Oklahoma City, was lost, confused, didn't know it, and went to high school at Putnam City High School. And my sophomore year, several friends on the football team had invited me to go to a revival. And a guy named Richard Hogue, some of you may remember him, was the speaker. And I can't remember anything he said, but he talked about, at the end, there was an invitation, and he talked about that God, if you could imagine a huge wall going down the center of the church, and on one side is where God is, and on the other side is where you are, and no matter how hard you try to reach where God is, you can't do it. But God saw that and loved you enough to provide a door in that wall. And of course, the door was Jesus, and the wall or barrier between us and God was our sin. And I recognized that. Somehow, some way, I recognized that I had never passed through that door and entered into a room where God was, but that God, he said, was anxiously awaiting me to make that decision. And so as a sophomore in high school, I made that decision. I didn't really have a good idea of what I was doing, but I can tell you now, I know exactly what I was doing, and it was exactly what I needed. I would say that decision radically changed my life slowly over a long period of time. And it's true. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You said you were in transition.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that brought you into transition and brought you back here? Kind of interesting. What are the
Today?
important- Yeah.
Okay.
Coming back to Tulsa.
Yeah. Well, when I took the job that I have now in D.C., not as a representative, but running the trade association, I had told my wife when they hired me, I said, babe, I said, let me tell you, this job is 5 years at the max, and we're back in Tulsa. Because she didn't want to go to Tulsa. She didn't even go back to Washington, D.C. when I was representing Tulsa. She stayed here, and I just transitioned back and forth every week. So she didn't want to leave Tulsa. This is where her family is. This is where her friends are. And so I told her 5 years, and now it's been 11 years, and I'm finally making that move back. So I think in both of our minds, really, we were thinking that Tulsa was where we were going to end up. And it just turned out that the job I had in D.C. I still love it so much that it was harder to give up than I thought it would be. And it's been a great transition, a great job for me to have because it contains so many of the elements that I like. It's an industry the wireless industry that's very competitive. It's very innovative, and the message that I have in that position is the same one that I preached when I was in Congress, and that is, create a competitive environment and let the competition rule, not rules and regulations. Let the competition work, and you'll get the best result for customers. And that's exactly what's taken place in the wireless industry for the last almost 11 years. So it was a perfect spot for me to be with the message that I had been delivering as a member of Congress for so many years. But I'm really excited about being back in Tulsa. And like I said, I don't have a clue what the next chapter of my life is. And so I really am in transition. So I think a lot of the things you're hearing and talking about here at this seminar are relevant to my life right now. But those things I talked about today are bedrock principles from the Lord, and I know that they will serve me as they'll serve you very, very well. So anyway, I'm going to quit there, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you, speak with you today, and have a great day. Thank you.